The desert was silent. Too silent. The kind of quiet that makes every distant engine hum and every shifting sand grain feel amplified. At a lone gas station, 7 bikers appeared on the horizon, engines roaring like beasts in the heat. Dust swirled violently around their tires, kicking up small clouds that caught the dying sun. Their leader rode ahead, confident, smirking as if the desert itself belonged to them. But standing in the middle of the lot, completely unshaken, was Steven Seagal. Black leather jacket, dark gloves, and sunglasses reflecting the golden light. No weapons. No backup. No assistant. Just him, calm, collected, and completely unafraid. The leader cracked a knuckle, a slow, deliberate motion meant to intimidate. "Looks like we found a movie hero," he said, voice dripping with mockery. The others laughed, circling slightly, revving their engines to make themselves appear more threatening. 7 against 1. Numbers in their favor. The unspoken assumption was clear. This man was alone, old, and unprepared. But they didn't know who they were facing. They didn't know that beneath the calm exterior was decades of martial arts mastery. Years of Aikido training had shaped his mind as much as his body. Discipline, control, and awareness were second nature. Calm wasn't weakness. Calm was power. Steven shifted his stance ever so slightly, adjusting his gloves with deliberate precision. Every glance, every movement from the bikers was carefully measured and mentally catalogued. A man like this didn't panic. He didn't need to. The leader leaned in, trying to break the tension with words. "You lost, old man?" Silence answered him. Steven didn't reply. He didn't flinch. He didn't act impulsively. His presence alone began to shift the energy in the air. Confidence in numbers started to falter, arrogance started to crack. The bikers had expected an easy target. What they didn't realize was that in situations like this, perception is everything. One wrong move, one loss of composure, and the illusion of power evaporates. In that moment, the desert wasn't just quiet. It was tense, charged, holding its breath for what was about to unfold. Steven had pulled into the gas station hours after sunrise, when the desert still held its early calm. The heat was already climbing, shimmering off the asphalt like liquid gold. He parked his motorcycle at a pump, engine idling quietly, and scanned his surroundings with the eyes of a man who had seen far more than most. No one would have guessed he was alone. No one would have guessed that the stillness surrounding him hid a mind trained for split-second decisions and decades of martial arts mastery. But the bikers noticed immediately. They saw a man alone, seemingly unarmed, in their territory and instantly assumed weakness. The leader, a towering figure with a leather vest and countless patches of authority, leaned forward, squinting against the harsh sunlight. "You lost, old man?" he jeered, voice low and condescending. His tone was sharpened with the certainty that comes from numbers, from being in control, from thinking that fear was a weapon everyone could wield. 7 men circled, engines rumbling. Each one wanted to prove himself, to make their presence known, to assert dominance over a lone stranger. But Steven didn't react. Not yet. He stayed calm, adjusting the cuffs of his gloves with deliberate precision, slow enough to signal awareness but not haste. Years of Aikido training had taught him patience. A patience that was never passive, a calm that was never empty. Every glance, every stance, every subtle movement of the bikers was being logged in his mind. He noticed the tension in their shoulders, the smirk hiding uncertainty in the leader's eyes, the way one of the younger bikers kept shifting his weight nervously from foot to foot. The leader moved closer, clearly expecting fear. "Numbers always win," he muttered, more to himself than to Steven. Steven's response was subtle, almost imperceptible. A slight shift of weight, a calm exhale. Nothing else. No words. No sudden movements. Yet already the dynamic was changing. The assumed power of the group, the roar of engines, the circle of intimidation, started to feel fragile. The leader's smirk didn't quite reach his eyes anymore. Confidence faltered. One of the bikers, trying to assert himself, nudged Steven's motorcycle lightly as if to test him. Another bumped his shoulder. Laughter followed, rough and forced. The leader cracked his knuckles again, anticipating a reaction. But Steven remained still, the calm epicenter of the chaos around him. What the bikers didn't realize was that strength isn't just about numbers, noise, or visible force. Strength is measured in awareness, patience, and control. And right now, Steven held all three. He didn't need to strike. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to act. His presence alone began to rewrite the rules of this encounter. 7 men, confident in their superiority, were beginning to hesitate. One glance around, one pause in their own movements, and they became aware of a truth they hadn't prepared for. Intimidation is temporary. Awareness lasts. Discipline lasts. Control lasts. Steven slowly tightened his gloves again, deliberately, methodically. Every small gesture was measured, a silent signal that he was not only aware of them but ready, not in aggression but in prepared calm. Ever notice how bullies act brave only when they're in a group? How quickly their confidence can crumble when faced with someone who doesn't panic, who doesn't react, but simply observes. In that sun-baked, dusty lot, the desert seemed to hold its breath. The bikers assumed the upper hand, thinking they controlled the situation. But in truth, one man, composed, alert, disciplined, was quietly rewriting the rules of engagement. And the lesson? True power often shows itself not through action, but through restraint. The sun had climbed higher, baking the desert air, making every movement feel heavier. Dust hung in the atmosphere like a slow-moving cloud, catching in the bikers' leather jackets and glinting off chrome. The 7 men circled Steven Seagal with the ease of predators confident in their numbers. One biker leaned over and nudged Steven's motorcycle with the tip of his boot. Another gave his shoulder a rough shove, a gesture meant to provoke. "Say something," one laughed, a bark of bravado masking the smallest trace of unease. Steven didn't flinch. He didn't shout. He didn't even move more than necessary. His calm presence acted like gravity, pulling the energy of the group into a slower rhythm, forcing them to pause and recalibrate. The leader stepped closer, cracking a slow, deliberate knuckle. His smirk had returned, but there was a subtle hesitation now in the way he held himself. "Numbers count for everything," he said, voice low, confident. He assumed that fear alone could bend a man to his will. But Steven's stillness spoke louder than words. He shifted just slightly, enough to signal awareness, enough to show that he wasn't intimidated. Every subtle movement, adjusting a glove, shifting his weight, was deliberate, a silent display of mastery over both himself and the situation. The youngest biker, trying to prove himself, revved his engine. The sound was meant to intimidate, to break the stillness. The tires dug into the gravel, sending another swirl of dust towards Steven. He didn't react. He simply tilted his head, observing. Every twitch of muscle, every blink, every micro-expression of the bikers was being quietly logged in his mind. Suddenly the energy began to shift. Confidence wavered. The arrogance that had seemed so solid moments ago started to crack. One biker glanced at another, a flicker of doubt in his eyes. They had expected easy fear, an outburst, a reaction. But instead they found patience, control, awareness. The leader raised a hand, attempting the classic intimidation stance, but Steven's calm presence cut through it like a shadow in bright light. The bravado that had powered the group's arrogance faltered. One biker laughed nervously, another swallowed hard. They were still in numbers, but the illusion of control was slipping from their grasp. Steven took a small, deliberate step forward, just enough to assert his personal space. No threat. No aggression. Just presence. The leader's knuckle-cracking slowed. The youngest biker's grin faded. They had underestimated him. Underestimated the power of calm, the quiet authority of someone whose discipline shaped every move. It was a lesson in perception. One that required no punches, no chaos, no harm. The biker's confidence, built on numbers and noise, was collapsing under the weight of a single man's composed observation. Has someone ever underestimated you, only for you to prove them wrong by staying calm, composed, and confident? In that desert lot, the engines roared and the wind stirred, but the real tension was invisible, a subtle current between human will and mastery of self. The bikers assumed dominance. They thought control was theirs. But in moments like this, control is more than muscle. It's awareness, discipline, and the quiet power to influence without action. Steven didn't need to strike. He didn't need to escalate. Yet, in every shift of his weight, every blink, every measured breath, he was silently communicating. The rules of this encounter had changed. And the bikers, slowly, almost imperceptibly, began to realize it. The desert sun blazed overhead, making the dust swirl around the motorcycles and leather jackets. The 7 bikers had circled Steven Seagal for minutes now, their earlier confidence fading into an uneasy tension they couldn't quite name. Each man shifted slightly, a nervous glance here, a hesitant movement there, the illusion of dominance slipping like sand through their fingers. Steven, however, remained calm, a figure of quiet authority in the midst of their restlessness. He took a deliberate step forward, just enough to close the distance but not enough to threaten. His leather gloves creaked faintly as he adjusted them once more, his movements precise and controlled. His dark sunglasses reflected the glare of the sun, hiding his eyes but revealing the steady rhythm of a man who had spent a lifetime mastering himself. "Enough," he said, his voice low but steady, carrying a weight that made the bikers pause mid-laugh, mid-smirk. The single word hung in the desert air like a tangible force, and for the first time the leader faltered. No punch. No aggressive stance. No loud threats. Just presence. Just calm. Just a man whose every gesture communicated that he was in control, not through violence but through certainty. The leader's hand hovered mid-air, as if unsure whether to continue the intimidation. His usual smirk was gone, replaced by a flicker of doubt. The other bikers exchanged quick glances, their bravado faltering under the weight of Steven's composure. What they had assumed was weakness had proven to be discipline, and the discipline radiated in every measured movement, every unshaken posture. Steven's voice cut through the tense silence again. "You don't need to test me. You don't need to prove anything. You already know who holds control here." The words weren't loud, but they carried authority, the kind that doesn't demand compliance because it inspires understanding. The bikers instinctively took a half step back. Their engines were still running, their motorcycles still powerful symbols of dominance, but suddenly they felt smaller, less confident. The desert, once theirs to command, felt charged with a new energy, one they couldn't manipulate. One of the younger bikers, trying to reclaim some sense of bravado, let out a nervous laugh. But it was hollow and the leader didn't support it. They had underestimated him. Not because he was old or alone or seemingly unarmed. They had underestimated the quiet authority of someone who didn't need to escalate to command respect. Steven's posture remained relaxed, his eyes hidden but observant. Every micro-expression, every twitch of muscle in the bikers' bodies was being recorded in his mind. He didn't strike. He didn't raise his voice. He simply existed in a way that redefined the power dynamic. The leader finally lowered his hand, tension leaving his shoulders in small increments. You're not like anyone we've met," he admitted almost reluctantly. "Strength isn't measured by numbers or noise," Steven replied calmly. "It's measured by awareness, control, and discipline." The younger bikers shifted nervously. They had come to intimidate a man they assumed was weak. But the reality was unmistakable. They were facing someone whose experience and calmness transformed every second into leverage. In that moment, the desert was still again. The dust hung in the air like a silent witness to the shift in power. The bikers had expected confrontation. They had expected chaos. Instead, they were met with clarity, control, and the undeniable presence of a man who didn't need to prove himself with violence. The leader nodded slowly, a begrudging respect forming in his eyes. We chose the wrong man," he admitted. Steven's lips curved in the smallest hint of a smile, not pride, not triumph, just acknowledgement of a lesson understood. "And this," he said softly, "is only the beginning." The bikers exchanged uneasy glances. Their numbers, their engines, their swagger, all had counted for nothing in the face of someone whose discipline commanded respect without force. They had learned, finally, that arrogance could not survive where awareness ruled. The desert was quiet again, but the lesson lingered in the heat, in the sand, in the subtle shift of energy around them. The desert sun was relentless now, high above, casting long, sharp shadows across the gravel lot. The 7 bikers had stopped circling, though their motorcycles remained ready, engines humming quietly like restrained predators. Confidence had left them, replaced with something unfamiliar: awareness. Every glance toward Steven Seagal betrayed a mix of uncertainty and grudging respect. The leader, still towering and imposing, stepped forward once more, perhaps hoping to reclaim the remnants of authority he had lost. "You can't stop us all," he said, voice louder this time, more challenging. There was a hint of desperation beneath the bravado. He was used to control through numbers, through intimidation. Now he realized that control wasn't guaranteed. Steven adjusted his sunglasses and let his calmness speak before he spoke. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't make a sudden move. He simply exhaled, slow and steady, letting the quiet tension grow around him. When he spoke, it was deliberate. "You don't see real strength," he said. "Numbers, noise, and threats don't define it. Discipline, awareness, and calmness do." For a moment, the leader's eyes flicked around at his men. They were no longer laughing, no longer revving engines or jostling to assert dominance. Each man's body language betrayed their new understanding. Intimidation could only go so far. Strength that lasts comes from within, not from the roar of an engine or the weight of a leather jacket. One biker, younger than the rest, swallowed hard and murmured almost involuntarily, You could have humiliated us." Steven's gaze held theirs. He didn't smile in triumph. He didn't gloat. Instead, his voice remained calm, steady, a lesson carried in every word. I didn't need to. Real strength isn't about domination. Real strength is about teaching lessons without harm. The words hung in the heat. A truth that reached farther than any punch or threat ever could. The bikers' minds worked in slow motion now, trying to comprehend what they had assumed was weakness. The quiet, solitary man, and realizing it was mastery. Discipline had won over intimidation, calm over chaos. Steven moved slightly, shifting his weight, demonstrating that he was aware of everything. Their stance, their breathing, the micro-expressions of doubt that now flickered across their faces. You chose disrespect. You assumed weakness. You've learned the consequences, he said softly, almost conversationally. And yet no one is harmed. No one is humiliated. That's the difference between strength and arrogance. The leader's jaw tightened. He had expected a reaction, perhaps even an aggressive confrontation. Instead, he received clarity, and clarity had a weight all its own. Numbers had failed him. Noise had failed him. What had not failed was presence. Calm, disciplined, unshakable presence. The bikers' arrogance evaporated like morning mist in the sun. They began to understand something subtle yet profound. Intimidation is fleeting. Discipline endures. Power is measured not in what you can destroy, but in what you can prevent through awareness and control. A silence settled over the lot, heavy but not oppressive. The engines of the motorcycles still thrummed, but now they sounded small, inconsequential. 7 men who had arrived confident and loud now looked uncertain, reflective. Each was learning a lesson that could not be taught by chaos or aggression, only by measured, deliberate restraint. Steven's gaze swept across them once more. True strength isn't proven through fear, he continued. It's proven through restraint, through awareness, through control. You don't need to dominate to teach. You don't need to harm to instruct. Discipline lasts longer than bravado. Respect outlives arrogance. One of the bikers exhaled slowly, finally accepting it. Another nodded almost imperceptibly. The leader remained silent, though the tension in his shoulders had eased slightly. Even he could feel the truth. This wasn't about numbers, it wasn't about noise, it wasn't about showing off. This was about power grounded in discipline, clarity, and calmness. The desert air hung still. The dust from earlier had settled, leaving only the subtle heat waves dancing across the asphalt. The bikers' eyes lingered on Steven, realizing that their assumptions, their bravado, their expectation of easy dominance, all had been challenged. And silently they acknowledged it. They had chosen the wrong man to intimidate. Should strength be used to protect, or to dominate? Can discipline and awareness carry more weight than force? In that desert, the lesson was clear. It wasn't about winning a fight. It wasn't about proving who was stronger. It was about demonstrating that calmness, control, and presence hold far more power than aggression. And in that moment, the bikers learned something they would not forget. The desert sun had reached its peak, the air thick with heat and tension. The dust that had swirled around motorcycles moments ago now lay heavy on the ground, settling like a blanket over the lot. The 7 bikers had stopped circling. Their confidence, once roaring, had diminished to uncertain glances and shifting feet. Steven Seagal stood at the center, calm and unshaken. He had said his piece. He had demonstrated restraint. He had shifted the balance of power without raising a hand. But the lesson was not complete. Lessons, when truly taught, often require a final demonstration. Subtle, firm, undeniable. He moved toward his motorcycle with deliberate steps, each one measured, each one purposeful. The bikers instinctively watched him, a mixture of apprehension and curiosity etching their faces. Here was a man who had faced them alone, who had remained calm under pressure, and who now prepared to leave, but not without reinforcing the truth he had silently delivered since the moment they arrived. Without a word, Steven lifted his motorcycle upright. The gleaming machine, heavy and powerful, rose smoothly as if it weighed nothing at all. The action was quiet, almost casual, but it spoke volumes. Physical strength paired with mental discipline. Precision paired with awareness. He didn't flaunt it. He didn't show off. He simply acted, demonstrating what control looked like in real terms. The leader, still towering and imposing, took a cautious step forward. "No one needed to get hurt?" he said, voice a mix of disbelief and grudging respect. "No one humiliated? You didn't even touch us?" Steven adjusted his gloves one last time and looked toward the group. His voice was calm, measured. "You chose disrespect. You assumed weakness. You've learned the consequences. But this is not about punishment. This is about understanding. Real strength is knowing when action is necessary, and when it is not. The bikers exchanged uneasy glances. They had expected chaos, confrontation, maybe even a fight to assert dominance. Instead, they had faced awareness, control, and presence. They realized now that the absence of violence was not weakness, it was mastery. One of the younger bikers, who had been the loudest and the most aggressive, swallowed hard. We thought we were in control," he murmured. His voice carried more awe than arrogance. Steven nodded, acknowledging the honesty without condescension. Control is never given by force alone. It's earned through patience, through awareness, through calmness. You assumed numbers mattered. You assumed aggression mattered. But you see now, neither defines strength. The leader, the oldest and most experienced of the group, finally exhaled. The tension that had been coiled like a spring in his shoulders slowly eased. For the first time he truly understood that this encounter had been a test, and they had failed not because of numbers but because of perception. Steven swung his leg over the motorcycle and started the engine. The sound was steady, controlled, precise. It carried the same lesson as his words. Strength is calm, not chaotic. Power is measured, not brash. Awareness wins where force cannot. The bikers stepped back, almost in unison. Their once lofty confidence had been dismantled quietly, efficiently, without a single punch thrown or threat enforced. In the desert heat, under the glaring sun, they finally understood that true power often reveals itself in subtlety. In restraint, in presence, in the ability to command respect without ever needing to strike. One of the bikers whispered to another, "He didn't even have to touch us, and we felt it." The leader, silent now, watched Steven ride off, dust trailing behind him like a reminder of what had just occurred. 7 men had come to assert dominance. One man had shown them who truly held it. And he did so without a fight, without humiliation, without harm. The desert, once again, settled into its quiet rhythm. The engines of the motorcycles were the only lingering sound, but even they felt diminished compared to the calm authority of a man who understood discipline. If faced with arrogance or aggression, could you have walked away like Steven? Calm, composed, and in control, letting your presence teach the lesson instead of your fists? The lesson was clear. Discipline over chaos, calm over aggression, awareness over intimidation. Real power is not in overpowering others. It's in showing the consequences of their assumptions through clarity and control. And as Steven disappeared into the horizon, leaving the bikers humbled and reflective, the truth remained. One man's restraint had rewritten the rules of the desert. One man's calmness had proven that true strength requires no display of violence to leave an impression that lasts far longer than fear. The desert stretched endlessly, golden and still under the late afternoon sun. Dust swirled lightly in the breeze, catching the light in fleeting sparks that seemed to dance in the heat. The 7 bikers stood at the gas station, their motorcycles idle, engines ticking down. Their confidence, once loud and unshakable, had been replaced with silence, the quiet of reflection. Steven Seagal mounted his motorcycle, his black leather jacket creased faintly in the warm breeze, dark gloves gripping the handlebars with effortless control. His sunglasses reflected the sun, hiding the subtle, calm assessment in his eyes. With a slow, deliberate twist of the throttle, he set the bike in motion, the rumble steady, powerful, and controlled, the perfect extension of the discipline he carried in every step, every breath, every gesture. As he rode off, leaving the dust trailing behind him like a visual echo of authority, the bikers watched, still processing what had just unfolded. What they had assumed would be an easy encounter, an opportunity to assert dominance over a solitary figure, had instead become a lesson in humility and awareness. 7 men, confident in numbers and intimidation, had been humbled not by fists or weapons, but by presence, calm, and precision. The leader finally spoke, his voice low, carrying a reluctant respect. We chose the wrong man," he admitted. His words were honest, stripped of arrogance, a quiet acknowledgement of defeat not in combat, but in perception. The younger bikers nodded, shifting nervously, their bravado thoroughly dismantled. They had expected confrontation, aggression, even humiliation. Instead, they received clarity, a demonstration that discipline and control far outweigh noise, threat, and aggression. The lesson wasn't just for them. It was for anyone who believes strength is measured in size, numbers, or intimidation. True strength, as Steven had shown, is calm. True power is measured not in domination but in restraint. The desert, once a theater for bravado, now held a quiet testament to awareness and preparation. Steven's calm departure left more than dust behind. It left reflection. The bikers stood in stillness, contemplating the subtle yet undeniable shift in their understanding. Each micro-expression, each hesitant movement, spoke volumes. The lesson had been internalized. They realized that fear can be manufactured, but respect must be earned. And respect, once earned, outlasts intimidation, arrogance, and even fear itself. As the sun began its slow descent, painting the horizon in streaks of orange and pink, Steven disappeared into the distance. The desert returned to its natural quiet, but the lesson lingered, imprinted in the minds of those who had sought to challenge him. It was not a lesson in aggression. It was a lesson in discipline, awareness, and presence. A lesson that spoke louder than any threat, stronger than any weapon. For the bikers, the encounter had transformed them. The younger men who had laughed and shouted in confidence, now understood that power without discipline is fragile. The leader, once assured of his dominance, had learned that assumptions are dangerous, and that underestimating a person based on appearances can carry consequences far greater than a physical fight ever could. Steven's actions were not about proving superiority. They were about showing that control and calmness are more powerful than chaos and aggression. He had demonstrated that lessons can be taught without harm, that authority does not require threats, and that true strength lies in restraint and awareness. The desert, now bathed in the warm glow of late afternoon, seemed almost alive with the unspoken understanding that had passed between the man and the 7 bikers. It was a quiet, almost sacred acknowledgement of a truth that transcended the immediate moment. Arrogance collapses when faced with preparation. Bravado crumbles under awareness. Respect endures where intimidation fails. Could you have walked away like Steven, calm, composed, and disciplined, letting your presence alone teach the lesson? Would you recognize the difference between power through intimidation and power through awareness? The motorcycles remained, the bikers' shadows stretching long across the gravel, but the true imprint of the encounter lay in the subtle shift of perspective. They had witnessed a masterful demonstration of self-control, an unspoken philosophy of strength that didn't need to be loud or violent to be effective. In that moment, the desert was not just a backdrop. It was a classroom. The lesson was clear, simple, and enduring. True power is calm. True strength is control. Arrogance collapses when discipline stands firm. No one was harmed. No one humiliated. Yet the lesson was indelible. 7 men had arrived confident, loud, and certain of dominance. One man, composed, disciplined, aware, had reshaped their understanding without a single strike. And for the audience, the takeaway is just as vital. Strength is not measured by aggression, by intimidation, or by numbers. It is measured by restraint, calmness, and awareness. It is shown in the quiet moments, in the controlled gestures, in the ability to influence without force. As the sun finally touched the horizon, casting long golden shadows across the desert floor, Steven Seagal disappeared from sight. The bikers remained, reflective, humbled, and forever changed by a lesson that required no violence to resonate. Speech balloon comment prompts. Do you think the bikers truly learned their lesson? Could you have remained as calm and composed as Steven in the face of arrogance? Thumbs up like if respect matters more than numbers. Repeat button share with someone who underestimates calm, quiet people. The encounter was over. The desert returned to stillness. But the lesson endured. Discipline lasts longer than bravado. Calmness outlasts chaos. And true power? True power is quiet, unwavering, and undeniable.